All right, so we're going to talk about mechanisms of evolution, which is change over time. But let's get in a little more detail. So we're going to talk about several mechanisms. You don't have to write these down right now. They'll come up within the notes. We're going to talk about artificial selection, natural selection, gene flow, genetic drift, mutations, and non-random mating. Let's look at a few diagrams and talk about some intro vocabulary. Some of the words we're going to use are chromosomes and DNA, gene, allele, etc. So let's start by just watching a little video about what a
What is a chromosome? To solve problems that explain and predict traits and variations, we first have to understand cells. All living organisms are composed of cells. Cells work like little factories doing all the jobs inside your body that are needed to keep your body functioning. Your body is made up of many different kinds of cells, such as skin cells, muscle cells, and nerve cells. Some cells look like squashed bricks, some look like donuts, and many have irregular shapes. However, every cell, no matter what its job, has the same basic parts. All human cells have an outer border that's the boundary of the cell, called the cell membrane. A liquid material called cytoplasm is inside the cell membrane, and there's a large structure suspended in the cytoplasm called the nucleus. The nucleus is the part of a cell that contains the genetic information. The nucleus is surrounded by a nuclear membrane that, like the cell membrane, makes a boundary around the nucleus. Now let's explore chromosomes. Chromosomes are thread-like structures located inside the nucleus of animal and plant cells. Each chromosome is made of protein and a single molecule of deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA. Passed from parents to offspring, DNA contains the specific instructions that make each type of living creature unique. The term chromosome comes from the Greek words for color, chroma, and body, soma. Scientists gave this name to chromosomes because they are cell structures, or bodies, that are strongly stained by some colorful dyes used in research. So what do chromosomes actually do? The unique structure of chromosomes keeps DNA tightly wrapped around spool-like proteins called histones. Without such packaging, DNA molecules would be too long to fit inside cells. For an organism to grow and function properly, cells must constantly divide to produce new cells to replace old, worn-out cells. During cell division, it's essential that DNA remains intact and evenly distributed among cells. Chromosomes are a key part of the process that ensures DNA is accurately copied and distributed in the vast majority of cell divisions.
Okay. So that was helpful. You've got a cell, you've got the nucleus, which is something that humans and other eukaryotes have. Bacteria are not eukaryotic, they're prokaryotic, and they don't have a nuclear membrane in which to hold their chromosomes. So they have chromosomes which are floating around loosely within the cell. And those cells have segments of their nucleotides that code just for a gene, which codes for a specific trait to make a protein. So here's a couple definitions to write down. You've got a genome, which is all of your DNA information that is withheld within the human's 23 pairs of chromosomes. And that's all found in the nucleus on chromosomes, which are made up of DNA and proteins. You have a gene, which is a heritable factor that can control a specific characteristic. So eye color, widow's peak, skin color, height, etc. The different forms of those genes are called alleles. Remember, we had widow peak is dominated by just one gene, and so one segment of DNA. And there's either yes, you have one, or no, you don't. And those are two different alleles for the same gene. Every human has 2 alleles. They could be the same or they could be different. And evolution is determined by a change in allele frequency. Sorry about that. The proportion of the gene copies in a population of a given allele. The higher the percent allele frequency, the higher likelihood it will be continued to be in that population. All right, first let's start with artificial selection, which is something that Wallace and Darwin both recognized as evidence for the process of natural selection. So humans often select traits for breeding, which can lead to evolution of a species over time. They do this with domesticated livestock. You might want a cow that produces a lot of milk. So those have been selected for and now have become a separate breed from the cattle that you use for meat. Foxes and wolves, this is a wolf, like to hang out with humans, and over time humans selected for specific ones that they wanted to be around because of their behavior or their beauty or their specific skills. And now we have thousands and thousands of different kinds of breeds of dogs. Now, natural selection is the way nature carries out this process. So we've talked about the 3 main steps. You have to have variation, and then you have to have some form of selection and reproduction. So nature selects which organisms will be successful. For example, if you have different colored beetles, brown and green, and the brown beetle is more camouflaged than the green beetle, then over time the green beetle will be selected against because it's more easily visible, and over time the population will change to have fewer green alleles or a higher proportion of allele frequency of the brown alleles, the brown beetles. All right, here's another look at it. The other thing that we talked about being really important is you have to have overproduction of a species. Then those forces which add competition and selection will act on the variation. It will select for the ones that are more adapted and more fit, and then you will have a population that... All right, now let's talk about gene flow. That is a transfer of alleles or genes from one population to another. So say you had 2 populations of birds that were on separate parts of an island that were separated. If somehow those gene pools started intermixing, that would be gene flow. You're introducing new genes into a population. So for instance, that can happen through migration. Either immigration, where one organism is moving into a population, or emigration, where something's moving out. Both of those situations would cause an influx or a change in the allele frequency. Genetic drift is another type of mechanism that can cause evolution. It occurs in the absence of natural selection due to random chance events. So this is where it's not just selected. This is something that Darwin didn't know about. So for instance, things that can happen can be mutation, chance dispersal, or extreme weather condition. So for instance, you got those beetles again. And something that by chance could happen, people could step on a big pile of brown beetles in a small population. Well, that could change, or step on just the green ones, I guess, in this picture. And that would leave the population with more brown beetles and fewer green beetles. So let's look at a couple other pieces of information about that. Okay, so there's one specific type of genetic drift called the founder effect. It occurs when a new colony is started by just a few members of the original population. So here's a really cool example. There was a small group of people, Amish Pennsylvania Dutch, who moved into a certain area and developed what is now the Amish community there. That small group of people didn't bring a very large gene pool, and they brought with them a genetic defect which created a 5 or 6 fingered variation that showed up fairly frequently in their population. Because it was a small population, there was some inbreeding, and they had this defect. Another thing that can happen is called a population bottleneck. It occurs when a population undergoes some major event and a significant percentage of the population are killed. This could eliminate a lot of alleles, and one of the examples of this is cheetahs. Cheetahs underwent a major extinction event with lots of mammals in the 1200s. A small population of cheetahs survived, but they had a mutation for a kinked tail, and so that's one of the characteristic features of cheetahs nowadays. Here's another way to look at a bottleneck. You can have lots and lots of variation, but if some major event allows only certain ones to survive, then that will become the dominant set of alleles in the new population. That could be earthquakes, floods, disease, volcanic eruption, meteorite, etc. So if you have a population size that goes through a catastrophic drop, they can either go extinct, which happens sometimes, or if they recover, that small group that survived dominates the recovery population. All right, another form of evolution is that mutation that we've talked about so much. Those are inheritable changes in a genetic sequence. This provides variation, the raw material through which natural selection acts. It's the only source of new genetic material and new alleles. They can be neutral, such as your free versus attached earlobes. They can be harmful, such as albinism, like this poor turtle. Or they could be helpful, like the false thumb that pandas have, that helps them hold the bamboo that they so like to eat. Causes of mutation come from a few locations. DNA can fail to copy accurately, or there can be external influences. So DNA, when it's copied, it unwinds to expose the individual base pairs, the cytosine, guanine, adenine, and thymine, and then it gets replicated. And in this case, there might be a mutation. One of the base pairs might be wrong, and that might cause something positive, negative, or nothing really important at all. There's external influences that can cause mutations as well. For instance, radiation can cause mutations, which is the big reason why when you go to the dentist, they put on the heavy lead apron on you so you protect the cells in your body that are quickly dividing. Smoking. There can be chemical carcinogens, such as the ones that you get from cigarette smoking, that can cause mutations and lead to lung cancer. There can be viruses and even other pathogens that can cause mutations. This particular picture is of HPV, the human papillomavirus, which you'll probably learn about in social issues this year. It's a virus that can cause cervical cancer. Here's a cool mutation that I'm not sure whether it's beneficial or harmful. All right. Another source of variation is non-random mating. So this is a way of doing natural selection, but within the population. So in animals, non-random mating can change the allele frequencies, as the choice of mate is an important part of behavior. So many plants self-pollinate, which is also a form of non-random mating. So random mating would mean members of a population could mate with any member that they're able to mate with. Non-random mating means they select based on a behavior or a look or some competition. Here's a picture of a self-pollinating plant where the pistil can collect the pollen. So over time, the plant has evolved so that it can pollinate itself. Now that doesn't cause it to evolve, it causes it to concentrate some of its own alleles, but it can be a means of survival if there aren't many members of your species around. Okay, so now digging in a little more detail, these are chromosomes, a common way of depicting chromosomes with certain allele highlighted here. So these are the locus for flower-colored gene. Those are homologous pairs. Now, because so many creatures on Earth undergo sexual reproduction, you can see how if you have two, one coming from mother, one coming from father, then you're going to have more variation, which allows for more possibilities for the population to survive in the event of a catastrophic event. So sexual reproduction results in variation of traits in offspring as a result of also crossing over. So you can get, when the chromosomes line up to duplicate, you can get crossover along with the variation you get from having sexual reproduction. And that causes some gene shuffling. Here's some sexual selection. The length of tail feathers. These are how evolution has interpreted this over time. The peacock feathers that we so enjoy. Size of the antlers on the elk, etc. All right, and that's the end of our notes today. So I look forward to seeing you in class on Wednesday. Bye.